The Christian economist. Did I say economist? This must be a new word. Economist. Maybe that's a unique word anyway. The Christian economist. Faith triggers. Some things cause faith to grow. The prophet Elijah was fed by ravens and drank waters from a brook. And when the brook dried up because of a drought, he was sent forth to Zarephath, where there abode a certain widow that the Lord was to raise up to feed him in the drought. Finding the widow, he asked her for some water and a morsel of bread. She, having only a handful of meal and a little oil, was going to produce something to eat for her and her son, and then they were prepared to die in the famine that had resulted from the drought. The prophet had decreed to the wicked king Ahab that it would not rain for the space of 3 years, except he, Elijah, should declare otherwise. In other words, it wouldn't rain for 3 years unless Elijah declared otherwise. King Ahab, because of his wife Queen Jezebel, had turned from the worship of the one true God to the worship of the pagan deity that Jezebel worshipped, Baal. Then that went against the first commandment, that those of God's kingdom were never to worship other gods. But when the prophet asked the widow of Zarephath for the water and bread, then she did an extraordinary thing. She used her last bit of meal to make a cake for Elijah, instead of making it into a last meal for her and her son. It was a, quote, faith trigger, close quotes, as I call it. That then engendered not only a series of miracles in her life, including the resurrection of her son, who at one point had died and Elijah brought back from the dead, but also unleashed a chain of events in history that have come down to the very present, right to us. 1 Kings chapter 17. So you see how critical faith is. It can be triggered by such things as a little gift, such as a handful of meal. But the cake of the widow of Zarephath was like the 2 low-value coins, the 2 mites of the widow of the temple. A value greatly enhanced because it was all they had. Quote, and he, that's Jesus, and he saw a certain poor widow casting in thither into the temple treasury, casting in thither 2 mites. And he said, of a truth I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast in more than they all. For all these have of their abundance cast into the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she had. Close quotes. Luke 21, verses 2 through 4. Nevertheless, you can start out with something lesser. These triggers, quote, triggers, unquote, these triggers are things you do, like manifestations of faith. But a little different because they cost you something in one way or another.